Hi, everybody. I'm Linda, and I'm so glad that so many people have registered for today's webinar. This is a really great topic, and I think can be very overwhelming for people when they decide to go and actually evaluate different communities. And it is one of those life experiences that can be very overwhelming. So the idea of how to understand continuing care retirement communities, abbreviated as CCRCs, and how to choose with confidence is hopefully what you'll be able to do by the end of this if you choose to actually evaluate CCRCs. And so I guess what I would say is what we say to many clients is that aging well just doesn't happen by accident. It really is something that it takes planning, and proper planning makes a huge difference in the result. And so when you think about any kind of planning, it gives you more choices, more control. It can save on your finances. And the bottom line is it gives you peace of mind. So when you're thinking about CCRCs, excuse me, you're actually developing your aging plan. And so the idea is to not, just assume that things will also always work out. And I think that, a good, very quick case study illustrates the difference between a proactive approach versus a reactive approach. So if you have a married couple and one spouse has actually had a stroke unexpectedly, and that just feels like an unspooling of financial, medical, emotional issues all at once. And for the people that haven't done any planning, you're scrambling to get estate planning documents done, many times for surrogate decision making, meaning you need to get financial and healthcare powers of attorney, but that there are other things that get adjusted when you have an ill spouse. You can also be scrambling around to deal with hospital issues, which could be discharge planning, and not understanding the Medicare, and not understanding the difference between observational status and being admitted, and not understanding how the hospitalization may affect down the line who pays for your first 100 days of rehab. It could be that if you don't have planning, that other family members who are part of the decision making don't actually have access to the confidential medical information under HIPAA. So when you think about reacting in a crisis, having to deal with surrogate decision making, finances, medical care, insurance, when you actually haven't unpacked all of that, it's very different than when you have been proactive, where you have intentionally built a roadmap, where your estate planning legal documents are actually developed, and surrogate decision making, if needed, is in place with the right people with the right documents. And that in terms of how you finance long-term care, if you've evaluated a CCRC, continuing care retirement community, you have some assurances as to where the discharge plan is actually going to go. And the idea is that whether the person needs to go to skilled rehab and then return to independent or somewhere in the middle, you have pre-selected the continuum of care. And you also have built-in support based on the continuing care retirement community having social workers who are actually familiar with that care coordination. So for me, there is a real difference of experience when people do planning. And it doesn't mean everybody should move to a CCRC, but you definitely want to make sure that you think about where you want to age with some more information in hand. So whether you move to a CCRC or not, I hope today's presentation will give you some more context. So when we think about the continuum of care, next slide, Allie. This is a tool from the Life Care Planning Law Firm Association, which is a national group of lawyers that are self-selected who have made a commitment to not only know deeply about Medicaid and Medicare, but also have a goal of being participating in continuum of care planning and care planning by having somebody on the staff, as we do, that are elder care coordinators. And one is a former nursing home administrator, one is a social worker. And the idea is that the legal work is even better and enhanced when we leverage it with our ECC, our elder care coordinator team members. This continuum of care is a really good tool to help people understand what the aging journey looks like, how you pay for long-term care, and also how there may be gaps where certain things just don't align. So if you look at this and keep this for future reference, the idea is that everybody plans at the very top line to have complete independence with no limits. And then at the very right hand side, we could have somebody, with the rest in peace. But the idea is never to worry about limited function or have any expectation that there would be significant limitations on function. But really, the idea of aging means that you may have things that are going to impair your ability to be independent. There are two categories. One is those activities of daily living, the physical limitations of bathing, toileting, dressing, feeding yourself, transferring. Those things can require a higher level of support. The other issue could be cognitive impairment. That can also require a higher level of support. What is the difference of the levels of support? Well, everybody plans on being at home and then possibly having some home health care, so you're home with assistance. Perhaps you are looking at a retirement community, CCRC. And if not, that means that if you do need care, you're looking for possibly a standalone assisted living, personal care, or standalone nursing home. And what happens is that there are people who are very far over to the right, having significant limited function, but are living at home with no assistance. And their concern is that the cost of care obviously goes up as you go through the continuum. And then what's even more confusing is how do you actually pay for this care? So we have lots of families that come to us where it is a patchwork quilt of family members and children providing care in a home for somebody that could be very complex and really need a high level of care. Some people are actually reluctant to use their assets and income for care. They don't understand, well, if you save for a rainy day and it's raining, the best use of your savings is getting some of the care at the lower levels to prevent you from needing to go to a higher level. There are a lot of adult children who are using their own money. Whether or not the parent has money or not, it varies on the case. And some people will have long-term care insurance. And my bottom line for that is don't think of that as nursing home insurance. Think of it as the insurance that can pay for the lower levels of care. And Medicare, what we know is that Medicare is important, but it doesn't pay for long-term care. Veterans benefits, such as aid and attendance, underutilized. Only 25% of vets, wartime vets that are financially qualified for aid and attendance actually benefit from it. And for Medicaid, the real misunderstanding is that this is an incredibly important safety net, and it is not just for the poorest of the poor. It has a lot to do with financing long-term care for the middle class and upper middle class. So this is the story that you're trying to get ahead of by making sure that you get to stay in the least restrictive setting on the second line with the lowest or predictable cost of care on the third line, and that you're not relying on unpaid caregivers or adult children or any other, difficult to access resource. So again, just a discussion tool for you guys as well as your family members. Next slide. So when you look to see with real statistics, do I really have to worry about this? Like, what exactly am I trying to plan for? So when you think about where to get accurate information across the country, Genworth has an annual report that they issue, which has now been rolled into another product, which is their Care Scout. But it's a very good summary, and it again goes through the whole country, and it tells us on a state-by-state basis how much the cost of care is. And so for Pennsylvania, you can see on the slide that there's a whole range, and the higher level of care has a higher number of, cost. For our Medicaid planning purposes, we use a statistic that the Department of Human Services, DHS, issues every year as to what it costs for care in Pennsylvania at a nursing home level. And when you annualize that, it's almost $150,000 a year. It's over $12,000 a month for nursing home care. So the idea is you're trying to get ahead of how do you pay for that? And just as importantly, how do you avoid that higher level of care? So when you think about the nursing home care, that's just one way to measure the cost. The other way to measure it is, okay, if you do want to stay home and you want to remain in your home and get support, how much does home health care cost? Well, if you need 24/7, we have clients that have decided to pay $30,000 a month for 24/7 one-on-one support. There are ways for us to actually lower that. We can also leverage personal service contracts with family members who are providing the one-on-one care. But after the pandemic, it has been very challenging for home healthcare companies to find really high quality people. And the rates that used to be used before the pandemic have gone up. $30 to $35 an hour, as well as the minimum staffing. So, where before you might have been able to get several 4-hour slots a week, there may be now a requirement to have 20 to 25 hours per week. When you think about personal care and assisted living, those are things that, again, have a monthly cost. And many people will say, well, if I can move into a personal care residence and it only costs, a standalone Sunrise, for example, and if it only costs $7,500, at least I'm not paying the 13,000 of the nursing home. But just to be very clear, the safety net of Medicaid is only available at the nursing home. And to be very clear, personal care and assisted living, we may be able to leverage the aid and attendance that I mentioned. It's really important. So understanding the actual costs so that you can decide, is a CCRC a good value so that you have predictable expenses now for whatever care may be needed is the question for today. So next slide. So when you think about moving to a CCRC, many people may be getting postcards in the mail saying, we would love to invite you come in for a visit, a tour, and we will have a lunch there so you get to actually taste the food. And what I would say is I've been in many, many CCRCs, and to me, it is amazing how each CCRC has its own energy, its own population mix, its own culture. So if you're going to evaluate a CCRC, you have to be able to define what it is that are your own personal choices. What is it that you're going to be looking for in terms of the right fit? And so when you think about, the things that come with every CCRC, yes, you're trying to decide whether you want the peace of mind of having the planning accomplished, you want the predictable cost, you want to understand what continuum of care on one campus are they offering, and understand that what you're actually buying is not a home or renting an apartment. What you're actually doing is looking at a way to finance long-term care. Next slide. So when you look at the definition under our Pennsylvania statute, what is a continuing care retirement community? A CCRC is any community that offers more than one level of care on that continuum of care. So when I go through the continuum of independent personal care, assisted living, nursing home care, it's not that the CCRC is going to go from very independent all the way up to the highest level of nursing home. And in fact, what I have read, the trend across the nation is that some CCRCs are actually choosing not to actually include the nursing home level. What we're also seeing is that many CCRCs, especially if they're not going to include the nursing home level, may choose to distinguish between personal care and assisted living. What does that mean? There is a huge difference. In Pennsylvania, this is extremely important because there are very few assisted living residences. There are fewer than 70, and I don't know how many more there really are, more than 60. But in terms of this continuum of care, if you are somebody that needs support at that high level at a nursing home because you have a need for support for more than two of those activities of daily living, bathing, toileting, transferring, feeding, those are those ADLs. If you need support with 2 or more of those ADLs, by definition, under our regulations, personal care is not the appropriate level of care. How many people do we know that may be in a personal care setting that actually are challenged with more than 2 ADLs and may be supported by not only the monthly fee of the personal care residents, but actually a one-on-one caregiver? So there is a real advocacy opportunity here to make sure that we don't have somebody who's had the tipping point of no longer being appropriate for personal care. If we have somebody who's looking at assisted living, true assisted living, it means that you can be that nursing facility clinically eligible, NFCE, and not be in a nursing home and yet be in the true assisted living, which looks more residential, that doesn't look so medical. So if you're looking at CCRCs, one of the things that you want to be very clear on is whether the CCRC offers personal care or assisted living. And if it offers assisted living, does it also have skilled nursing? So you really need to be a very sophisticated consumer because you're spending a lot of money to join the CCRC, and the monthly fees for the different levels can vary.
Linda,
When
one
you,
of the sorry, one of the questions was just to expand upon personal care.
Okay, so personal care is, again, Pennsylvania has these regulations that say if you want to hold yourself out as a personal care residence or you want to be assisted living or a nursing home, the regulations relate to the level of staffing. And for assisted living, it will include like the size of the apartment, when the apartment includes like a separate kitchen area. So the idea is that we're looking at a level of regulation that's built to be a safety net for particular people with certain needs for support. And the idea is that personal care, people may need support for meal prep. They may need sort of tiered approaches. And if you were to go to a personal care, there may be tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and it could be that you might benefit from medication reminders. It may be that you need, different levels of support, but that you're not actually completely dependent on physical activities of daily living. When it comes to cognitive impairment, one of the things that's very, very challenging for consumers is to sort out where's the best place to get memory care. And our elder care coordinators really work very hard to make sure that we try to do right by our clients. They may be in a personal care setting that has memory care, or they may need to transition to a nursing home that has secure memory care as well. And the distinction between where memory care comes in is also confusing because it can occur in different places. But personal care is meant to be for people that are lower on that continuum of care that do not yet need support in 2 or more activities of daily living. And many of them will have memory care that may be a very significant cognitive impairment, and they do many times have a protected environment. If there are any more questions about that, I will go in a little bit deeper later on at the end. Any more questions, Allie, about that?
No more questions.
Okay, great. So a CCRC is going to have more than one level of care, but again, you're not sure how many levels, and to distinguish between personal care and assisted living, and to make sure that if it has a nursing home, that's different than the assisted living. Okay, now when you think about the things that the baseline, next slide, the baseline choices, these are the things that are advertised and on the tour, and really are many times, the things that are used as the selection checklist. And community size, sometimes people want a much smaller community. Sometimes people want to have a very large community with many more amenities. The amenities can include a theater, a swimming pool, health club, all kinds of different places to eat. Some are plated meals where you are expected to dress. Some of them are buffets. Some of them are like pubs. Some of them will allow you to bring a pet of a certain size. Some of them, if you are in our surrounding area, you may have friends and family that are in the area, and you want to make sure that you're actually supported and that they're able to visit. Sometimes people are solo seniors and looking to build this network because they don't have friends and family in the area, and they're actually going to build their community and their safety net on site with the CCRC. So these are some of the things, but to definitely take tours and know that each place is going to feel so different. And that becomes sort of like the first level of analysis. Next slide. So when you think about, we did touch on this, the financial qualifications and costs of your future healthcare. Well, you have to understand those levels of care and what's being offered so that you understand what each level costs. We know what the averages are in Pennsylvania based on that Genworth study, but how does this CCRC compare? And so many times people are surprised at the different nursing home rates of a CCRC than other places that may not be in a CCRC. Many CCRCs are going to have private rooms. And the idea is that you may be paying a premium to be on the same campus with your spouse. And so really understanding what each level costs is extremely important for you to understand the levels. We mentioned briefly, where does memory care occur? There can be different philosophies in CCRCs as to where it occurs. Sometimes the idea is that people with cognitive impairment can do really well at independent level because there are other residents that sort of are keeping, an informal support. And if somebody doesn't have an elopement risk, and that's not the concern, there are many people that can do very well at independent. There may be a secure personal memory care and personal care. There may be secure care other places. But again, to look at and discern the difference between memory care at a nursing home, memory care at personal care versus assisted living. Does the skilled nursing facility, abbreviated as SNF, accept Medicaid? It's not unheard of now for CCRCs to accept Medicaid. And the idea is that Medicaid in Pennsylvania really occurs at the nursing home level. And it is important to know whether or not it accepts Medicaid because there can be some very interesting calculations under Medicaid that will vary significantly whether the spouse who's in the nursing home is in the CCRC or outside at a standalone skilled nursing facility. And one of the case studies we have at the end, we'll try to squeeze in some examples. Other amenities, is there an on-site pharmacy or is there a contract with the pharmacy? Is there support for doctor's appointments? That's not on the slide, but it's a good one. Some CCRCs are going to have an option to join their Medicare Advantage plan so that they're actually offering that and figuring out whether you want to keep your original or traditional Medicare or actually possibly transition to a Medicare Advantage that dovetails with the CCRC is a good issue to resolve. And then many CCRCs, not many, many of them have in-home relationships with home health care companies. Many of them under the contract will say you can bring in home health care from outside vendors if they're pre-approved. And why is this important? Because many people will say, yes, I understand there's a continuum of care, but if I'm living in my independent unit, I want to understand, may I remain there if I build in the support with an additional cost of getting home health care in? And what's nice is that some CCRCs may have a relationship with a home health care company and they're able to provide sort of a la carte support and not necessarily have to have the 20 to 25-hour commitment that you might be subject to if you're in your own home. And again, this is a nice way that CCRCs are able to leverage having people remain in their independent living unit. So when you think about trying to figure out what you're shopping for and understanding the continuum of care, this is just some of the very basics that you want to make sure you understand. Next slide. When you when you look at the financial qualifications and costs, you have to understand that not everybody that wants to move to a CCRC will actually be given an option to move in under a full contract, a life care contract, which we'll talk about in a second. And so for many people who say, you know what, I'll go when I'm ready, this slide is meant to give you some context so that you understand you may be ready now, but if you wait too long, you may no longer qualify. Medical underwriting is part of the screening of the CCRC because when you look at how the community is built, it's designed to have many more units for independent and a fewer number for the personal care and even fewer at the nursing home level. And so by looking for residents that come in, they want to see, are people coming in as independent and are they likely to stay at independent? If you're going to not be able to move into independent, it may be challenging to get a contract, and we'll talk about that in a second. What if you have a serious diagnosis? How does that actually affect your medical underwriting? What if you don't have a diagnosis, but you have a concern? Maybe, you've observed a parent and perhaps there's a little bit of memory that's slippage. How do you look at this medical underwriting as a pre-qualification is something that we often will help our clients with as prospective residents. There's also financial underwriting. More than one time, I can think of in the past year, we've had clients that have just assumed they're coming from a 4-bedroom house and they're going to downsize to a 2-bedroom unit and they're going to want to have certain, amenities and sizes, or perhaps they want to be on a carriage house. And what they come to understand is that the choice of the original home size that they want will affect the entrance fee and the monthly cost based on their assets, their age, their income. There are financial calculations applied by the CCRC to see if this person's a good fit. What this sometimes means is that the person who's going in may have an explanation from the CCRC that, based on your choice of such a large unit, you may not get a real life care contract. It's too generous for your assets and your income. Perhaps you would like to choose a 1-bedroom or a 1-bedroom with a den. And so the idea is for you to understand it's not just up to you to select the CCRC and assume that you're going to get a green light, but to understand before you put a preliminary application in, what assets do you have and how will they actually be used to qualify you for your entrance fee? And then based on your income, what is it that you're going to be paying every month until you pass away? Next slide. So you are looking, you've gone and taken the tour, you've eaten a meal, you've seen the beautiful, apartment that's decorated, and now you're looking at, the types of contracts. You understand the continuum of care, and you're saying, okay, now how much does it cost? Well, the entrance fees in the good old days were very predictable. The idea is that with an entrance fee of X amount, it became over a period of time, it amortized so that perhaps over 4 years, every month, a little bit of your entrance fee would be considered earned without any refund potential, and that at the end of 4 years, your entrance fee would be non-refundable. And with those non-refundable fees, the opportunity was for you to have more predictability with the monthly fee. If there's no expectation that you get your entrance fee back, then no matter where you go up this continuum of care from independent personal care to nursing home, you were given assurances that your monthly fee was predictable. So for people that want absolute predictability, moving into a CCRC is not actually, buying an apartment. It's a contract for care, and it's in the version of a type A contract, a life care contract. Through the years, people had objections to moving into a CCRC because they thought, well, what if I never use the highest level of care? What if I want to, terminate my contract? How is it that I could unwind this and have the potential for a refund? So they modified the life care contracts, and now we have all kinds of different refund options. And so sometimes it's a 90%, sometimes it's an 80%. And the idea is that if you're going to get a refund, then we're not going to lock in your monthly rates. And there are variations on the theme for these modified contracts. And then sometimes people are just not going to medically or financially qualify, but yet they want to move into the CCRC, and they may be given a pure fee for service contract. In some cases, the CCRC may say, well, we're all fee for service here, but the fee for service has a built-in premium for the monthly costs at each rate. And then perhaps there's a benevolent fund. The bottom line is that you have to realize not one bit of shopping for the type of CCRC contract is going to be understood until you actually give them the preliminary application and see what you qualify by way of size of unit. And then you have to decide how much certainty do you want with this type of contract. So it's very, very challenging. And it gets even more challenging because now within the life care contract, imagine somebody that pays for a carriage house and pays $500,000 for a carriage house and a monthly fee of $5,000, and then lives in the carriage house for a very short amount of time, but then has the same monthly fee even though they're in the same personal care or same nursing home as somebody that may have gotten a studio. And so what has happened is that there's this concept of life care with equalized rates. So again, this is always a moving target, and it's to be very a good, sophisticated shopper when you're reading the contracts. And then again, if you've got a fee for service, sometimes the CCRCs have modified the fee for service where you will get a certain number of days at a discount before the full cost is actually applied. So again, just know that the marketplace is always shifting, and to really know, it used to be so simple with our type A life care contracts, but it's not simple anymore. Okay, next slide. When you're looking at a CCRC contract, there are some typical issues that are baked into it, and it's not necessarily possible to negotiate these issues away. So it's the kind of thing that you want to understand before you sign the contract, before you pay the entrance fee. When you think about the transition from independent to personal care to nursing home care, each CCRC is going to have a protocol as to how to evaluate that transition. And every once in a while, the resident or the family and the resident feel that the transition is premature, that the independent level is still appropriate, or that the personal care level is still appropriate. How do you have that conversation where the CCRC and the family or the resident looks at it differently? Typically, the contracts are going to say that the CCRC is going to have the final word on this. But there is an expectation that there would be some kind of reasonable process where perhaps the family, a doctor would be consulted, but just know that if a contract gave each resident their own unique timeline, there's no way that the CCRC could organize and manage a number of residents. So it's not unexpected that it has it, but you want to see how tight that control is. If you are going to terminate a contract, you have to read what happens. And with a contract, it has different provisions before you move in, after you move in. If it's a non-refundable fixed fee that amortizes, what is the timeline for amortization? If it's a potentially refundable fee, then what are the charges that will be deducted for it? There may be a refurbishment fee. And there also may be a process that if your unit has to be resold and another resident is required, want to inquire as to how long does that usually take? Is it the first unit when one unit comes in, is that new entrance fee applied to the one that's been on the list for the longest, or is it assigned to that particular unit? So there are all kinds of issues that have come up that are, again, very important to sort of unpack. Another question is this, when people are evaluating this, they want to have care for life. And when you think about these contracts, they're actually regulated by the Pennsylvania Department of Insurance. This is an insurance product. And so for many people, their insurance is measured by, I will have care for life even if I deplete my assets. There's no legal requirement that a CCRC contract have a benevolent fund. And a benevolent fund, if it is going to be applied, will be based on the contract as to how diligent the CCRC will be in evaluating whether you would get access to the benevolent fund. What happens if you apply for the benevolent fund? It's not as if you're gifted more assets. What happens is that your monthly fee, which is no longer paid by your assets because they've gone down, is now subsidized by the benevolent fund. And there's an expectation that you, if you come into other assets, that you would actually no longer need the benevolent fund. There's an something that will be recovered by the community afterwards. In some cases, you have to look at the contract and see whether there's any requirement to look for support from family members and friends. This raises a very interesting question where occasionally we'll have residents who want to move to a CCRC. And in order to meet those financial requirements that we referred to earlier, an adult child may have to be a guarantor for a period of time. And again, if you're going to have that, you want to make sure you measure the guarantee for a particular amount in a particular period of time. But the benevolent fund is not something that is always, a black and white guarantee, and it's not always in the contract. So again, when you're reviewing the contract issues, you want to focus on that.
We have
And I
another
think,
question, Linda.
yep, go ahead.
What if the CCRC is sold? What rights do the residents have if a new owner wants to change the contract or raise the fees?
Okay. So when a business is sold versus when a business goes bankrupt, I think there are different answers to this question. So I'll answer both. Most times when a CCRC is sold, the idea is that the contracts are part of what the assets are that they are purchasing. The new buyer has these contract rights. If you review the contract doesn't limit the number of increases that are possible on the monthly fees. These contracts do not limit the percentage potential increase for however many increases they are. However, many CCRCs are very practical and will answer the question, which is, I will show you the trend over the recent years about the annual increases for the different levels of care. But just understand, there's typically no contract right to only one increase a year or that it's capped. So it's always a potential that if there's a new owner, that there might be an adjustment. When there is a potential bankruptcy of a CCRC, then when you think about the owners, the question is whether or not they're creditors, just like many other creditors, and that their contract rights could be affected. And that's truly the scarier, event. And so when you think about CCRCs that have a bankruptcy, there is some regulation as an insurance product and other, when long-term care insurance products have gone under, there's been some support by the Department of Insurance. But again, it's very important, and why we're going to talk about in a second, to really be able to understand the strength of the CCRC. Just going back to the final point of the slide, when I die, if my estate's entitled to a refund, how quickly will the refund be paid, and can it be paid to named beneficiaries of the trust? I alluded to this a little bit earlier. Sometimes there's the, if another unit is sold, does that proceed now get applied to your refund, or is it the refund tied to the that particular unit that was just purchased? And in some cases, paying money to an estate subjects those refunds to creditor claims, and sometimes it's much better to actually have named beneficiaries. And so there are CCRCs that will allow the prospective resident as part of their contract to designate specific people or a trust or other arrangements. So it's again very nuanced. Each CCRC is likely to have a different option. Okay, so the next slide. Now, when you think about that bankruptcy question or the sale question, the idea is that, these are accounting, financial metrics, audits that are not necessarily law firm work. And many times we will do some of our due diligence skims the very top of these financial metrics. But it's also important to start digging and understanding that this is how you measure the strength of a CCRC. And these numbers are guidelines. They are not hard and fast. And it's important to know that each CCRC is going to have certain materials in their disclosure form. They're going to have certain materials in their 990s that are filed every year. And you can go as deep as you would like in terms of analyzing these metrics. Certain CCRCs will choose to be accredited. That accrediting company also has a really interesting annual report on the trends of these metrics for the CCRCs that are members. So you can go into this area of exploration and spend a lot of time in really looking at what is it that that we can tell. If you go to the next slide, here's some language that you can use when you're actually talking to the CCRC. What is the occupancy rate? What is the refund on the entrance fees? Will you share some audited financials or actuarial studies? If you have a CCRC that offers those life care contracts, those type A contracts, they have to actually have actuarial studies every 3 years because they have an obligation to refund lots of money, and the idea of the health of the CCRC being measured and quantified periodically is important. So this is, again, some of the things that you can ask the CCRC to just sort of, pick through the sock drawer and figure out how are they doing financially. Next slide. Again, how do we know how each CCRC is doing? Well, in New Jersey, I actually prefer the structure of the support and the regulation to Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is more of a disclosure state, but on this slide, we have some of the pieces of the puzzle for the legal oversight. Knowing I've got probably 2 more minutes, and I'll go over just 2 more minutes. If you go to the legal and financial preparation slide, Allie. The idea is that there's certain things on a checklist that if you're going to think about this, you want to make sure you get your estate planning done because you're building surrogate decision-making in powers of attorney for finances and medical, and making sure that your assets are listed clearly, your income's clearly listed. If you're going to be selling a house, you need to understand how the Internal Revenue Code is going to apply to your sale so that you can figure out what your house is going to be after the sale. And if you're going to have to liquidate other assets, again, I don't do financial planning, but I've seen people work with financial advisors to make their entrance fee available. And then if you have certain types of assets, we have clients that will say, you know what, the shore house is something that I'm not going to want to have to worry about once I move into the CCRC. How do, as part of my estate planning, take that off my balance sheet? Well, we will sometimes do a revocable trust for camps or shore houses, or sometimes we have business assets and we need to make sure those are handled properly. And then I think a couple comments about the next slide, family communication and support. it's interesting. These CCRC evaluations are never easy for the parents. Many of them will say, I'm not ready. Well, please understand that when you're ready, you may not financially or medically qualify. Sometimes the adult children will say, I'm willing to pay for the care. I'm willing to provide the care. I don't want my inheritance to be tied up with a refund. And what I would say is that this isn't a question of whether the children are going to be a resource. It's a question for the parents as to what is your aging plan. I've never had anybody come in and say, I want to be a burden to my children. And so while many children will say, of course I would take care of mom, when it comes time to actually support them, they had no idea what the care was going to require. And really, it's very tough for people in the sandwich generation. Waiting too long can be a risk. So for me, I would encourage you to think about, what is it that what is your aging plan? And know that if the CCRC isn't going to be your pathway forward, there is still a reason why you might want to think about how to design an aging plan. And we can also help with that as well. So I'll just leave, 1 minute. I don't think we'll have time for case studies, but if there are any final questions, I'll take a few of them.
We actually don't have any questions.
Okay. All right. Well, what I would say is when we hang up, if you decide that you do have questions later on, you can feel free to email some of us. We'll make sure that we send out the slides. And again, there's so much more information that I would love to focus on. So if people have specific questions, and there's a number of them, we could always do a part 2 to the people that have later questions. Always happy to help. So thank you for joining us today.
Yes, if you do have any questions, you can email info@andersonelderlaw.com. That's an email that you can use. And then we do have a question about if you can download this slide deck later. This will be on the website by the end of the week under our resources section.
Yep. And I think we're also going to put a checklist on there that you can take with you.
We will have some resources. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
Very
great.
good. Well,
Thank you,
thanks,
Linda.
everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.